to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, first item is public comment. The public comment is not the public hearing. If you have comments on the budget, we will have a hearing later. Does anybody wish to comment on other items besides the budget? I have not been approached. You have not. All right, we will then move on to the budget hearing. We're here today because of a glitch in the noticing of the public hearing with the Daily Herald. We're required by law to publish it. We had a hearing scheduled for November 1st. Unfortunately, that did not receive the 15 days notice due to delays in its publication. So the county board authorized the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee to hold a hearing in compliance with the state statutes, and the entire county board was invited. We have before us the 2025 budget, and I want to just go back and talk a little bit about how it was developed and how we got to where we are. We started the process of educating the county board on the budget process early in the summer, and the county board then adopted budget priorities and budget assumptions that were given to the administrator for the purposes of developing the budgets. The committees were engaged in the process and encouraged to review those programs, spending, and fees under their jurisdiction and make recommendations to the administrator. Some of the committees did do that. All the committees participated in that process. Those assumptions and priorities were then shared with the department heads to develop their request of the administrator. He then met with them and presented a budget to the county board in October. The committees, several of the committees have met to review the budget as it impacts their jurisdiction. This committee had accepted that budget for publication with one amendment. And that brings us to where we are today. But in the priorities, the county board had said we did not want to use general fund reserves, set a employee compensation at 3%, health insurance, a target of 6.5%, set up a number of other assumptions relative to utilities, indicated that new positions should be fully funded outside of the levy, and again, encouraged the committees to review fees and public charges to make sure that we stay current with inflation. We looked at what the incoming revenues were relative to net new construction, which is at 1.78, which means that the new construction in the county was 1.78 higher than it was a year before. That becomes important for the purposes of establishing the levy for the county. The levy limits imposed on the county limit us to increasing the levy by net new construction, with a couple of exceptions for debt service and others. We received our increase in shared revenues associated with the change that the legislature had relative to sharing in the sales tax, where 1 cent of the sales tax comes to the county. Transportation aids are relatively flat. Sales tax for the purposes of the budget was kept flat because any surplus at the end of the year in the general fund goes into the capital improvement fund. We've developed it. Part of the budget has both the operating budget that goes to operate our departments, as well as the capital budget. This year you have before you not only the capital improvement plan, but you also have an effort to try to project costs out for capital over the next 5 years. And we've been trying to do a better job of budgeting and understanding what those are. The original budget submitted by the administrator was $181,665,000. Those numbers will change due to I think adjustments necessary. It doesn't affect the levy, but adjustments internal to it via amendments that will be considered by the county board tomorrow. Quickly, where we are, this budget is somewhat of a status quo budget, and those are the words of the administrator. The tax rate under the budget will go down approximately 20 cents a thousand on the mill rate. The impact to the property owner is different than the tax rate. One of the issues that has come up is the fund balance and the size of the county's fund balance. And the county has several fund balances, including the general fund that goes for, or comes from the general, most of the departments in the county, the clerk courts, the administrator, sheriff, health department, others. We have other accounts such as highway reserves that are generated by the highway department. We have a social improvement fund associated with the Department of Social Services, the solid waste fund, parks fund, capital improvement fund, and debt service fund. Just because we have money in the reserves account does not mean that those are assets that are available to the county. Many of those funds are committed to projects restricted in use or assigned. For instance, the general social improvement fund, I think that is oversubscribed, or we're committed to paying for programs because of the source of funding and commitments to the state of Wisconsin. In the case of the highway department, there are funds that are allocated for, we took $7 million out of it for funding of projects this current year, and proposed for next year. We have $4 million plus of projects in 2026 and 2027, and we've been trying to put money aside for the construction of a new highway facility with an estimated cost of $59 million. With that background, Administrator Leonard, is there anything that you would like to add?
I would, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just be remiss if I didn't first thank the board for the direction it provided through the process that the chair referenced. It certainly makes my job a lot clearer. Doesn't make it easier, but makes it more clear as to where the priorities lie for the board. And then, of course, to Sam, the team in finance, all the department heads, they really did an exceptional job. And I just want to thank the board again for the opportunity to serve as the administrator, and happy to continue to answer any questions individuals may have relative to the budget.
All right. And again, there were links to the budget and the budget message and the notice. We'll now go to the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee did make one amendment prior to publication, and that was to set aside funding for the occasional or staffing for the purposes of dealing with tax delinquent properties, sale of surplus properties, and addressing some of the issues relative to getting those properties back on the tax rolls associated with dealing with housing, as well as dealing with surplus properties such as the River Drive facility that will be vacant in February or early next year, and the Thomas Street location for the Department of Social Services, which is relocated. Do you want to read the notice? I think we're at that point.
Marathon County Notice of Public Hearing, Consolidated 2025 Proposed Budget Summary. Residents and taxpayers will take notice that the Marathon County Board of Supervisors has arranged for a public hearing on the 2025 tentative budget to be held in the Marathon County Assembly Room at the Marathon County Courthouse, Wausau, Wisconsin. An official public hearing is scheduled for Monday, November 11th, 2024 at 3 p.m., with final approval on Tuesday, November 12th, 2024 at 6 p.m. The public hearing will be for the benefit of Marathon County taxpayers who desire to be heard. The following is a summary of the tentative 2025 budget. Public inspection of the detailed report may take place at the office of the county clerk. Proposed for 2025, tax levy is $59,851,312. Mill rate is $3.79. Equalized value is $15,775,534,800.
All right. With that, we will open up the public hearing. Members are given 3 minutes to make their comments. And Judge O'Neill, you had approached the chair if you want to come forward.
So good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Suzanne O'Neill, and for those of you who don't know me, I am the circuit court judge that presides in Branch 1. Additionally, I serve as the chair of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council here for Marathon County, and I'm also one of the judges assigned to our Drug Recovery Treatment Court. I'd like to address Supervisor Sandelsky's Amendment Number 5 of the proposed budget. It proposes to decrease funding of the OWI Treatment Court by $107,528. While the proposal does appear to target only the OWI Treatment Court, defunding that treatment court program would reduce significant resources to the Drug Recovery Treatment Court program. I and the other Marathon County Circuit Court judges urge you to reject the amendment and continue full funding of all of our treatment court programs. I ask you to consider a letter that the judges of the county have authored and signed. It highlights why we believe that the treatment courts are worthy of continued full funding. Additionally, at the September 2024 meeting of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, there was unanimous consensus that the council recommend to the board to continue full funding of the treatment courts, and that if there is a surplus of that funding, that any remaining funds be allocated to address treatment needs of the inmates of the Marathon County Jail. As our letter outlines, we have witnessed participants change their lives to become valued members of our community. We have collected data which evidences the success of the programs. We are committed to following evidence-based practices to ensure the programs continue to be successful. We acknowledge that the programs are not perfect and that we need to continuously improve and adapt to the changing science of addiction and recovery, as well as our local landscape. We're open to implementing changes which improve the programs and outcomes for the participants and for our community. Throughout the existence of the programs, we have met quarterly to review and discuss what has changed in substance use disorder treatment and the nationally recognized best practice standards, as well as what appears to be working or not working in our local programs. Additionally, based upon the suggestion of Supervisor Sandelsky, we are implementing an executive oversight committee to periodically review best practices and to implement those into our programs. We're happy to report to the board periodically throughout the year to provide an update as to how the programs are functioning. Marathon County is not immune from the substance use disorder pandemic. It has spread for decades over the country. Treatment courts have demonstrated success and provide the best hope we have of addressing the epidemic or pandemic, depending on how you want to phrase it. The treatment courts in Marathon County have proven to be successful, more successful than the statewide average. We urge you to remain on this path of success and to continue full funding of the Marathon County Treatment Court programs. We thank you very much for the support that you've given these programs over the past 13 years. Hope that you will consider full funding in the future. Thank you for your time today.
Okay, is there anybody else that wishes to speak today? If you come forward, identify yourself, and the clerk has pointed out that the comment should be addressed to the chair, consistent with our rules, but understanding that the public is eagerly waiting for them. You have to come up front. Okay. So we have, I'm sorry, we.
I'm out of time.
Do we hold hands or?
Sing Kumbaya or?
I'll be short and sweet. Okay.
Hi, my name is Tom Krieger. I'm a resident of the town of Hewitt. And before I start talking about the county budget, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my own budget. I didn't receive a 10% raise this year, a 5% raise, a 6% raise, nothing along the lines of that. In fact, with the inflation over the last 4 years, you could probably say I received about a 5% reduction in my actual buying power. So while it's really easy to spend the money of other people that you don't earn when it's actually your own budget, it's a little bit different. So the next thing I'd like to add to the whole thing is that there's going to be a suggestion that we actually cut $1.6 million from the proposed property tax increase. I'm in favor of that. And I would certainly like to see us rescind the one-time wheel tax that's been around way longer than a single time. I think it's time for the board to actually honor that one-time obligation and move on. And if we need to figure out ways to make the county work better, I'll bet you we can find some ways somewhere in the county. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom.
Hi, my name is Bob Peterson. I'm a resident of Wausau, lifetime resident, and I've never been to this meeting. I've never done anything like this before in my life. So if I'm a little bit nervous, I'm sorry. Trying to follow that guy right there, the wheel tax. You reached in our pocket and you took listen, I'm a 74-year-old guy on fixed income. And this last 4 years has been horrible for most John Q. Publics. This $25 wheel tax, I don't believe any of us voted on that. I think by a stroke of the pen, you just reached in our pocket and took it. Well, it's like any other tax. Once you get on it, you don't want to let go of it. It's time to let go of it. It needs to be gone. It needs to be gone now. Thank you.
Anybody else wish to make comments?
Good afternoon. I'm Dave Baker. I live in Croninwater, Wisconsin. And I want to thank you all for both the staff and the board for all the hard work you've done on putting the budget together. I also want to thank our news organizations, our newspapers, those websites that have published my letter to editor, and Meg Ellison, who's done a really good job of publicizing the wheel tax issue and reduction in, hopefully, or not reduction, but stopping the increase in property tax. So I just want to thank all of those people and all the concerned citizens who I've heard have called, which I've heard has been quite a few. So I have done some analysis, and I'm sure there's been some pushback, and there will probably be some more calling it misinformation. So I am going to publish one more blog, marathoncountyspotlight.com, before tomorrow evening. So if you do want to take time to read that, it's going to be labeled Combating Misinformation. So thank you. Bye.
Is there anybody else that wishes to provide public comment? Anybody else? Pat?
Hi, Pat Snyder, now a resident of Weston. I just want to reiterate what the judges have talked about with the OWI court. I do think it is very valuable. I've seen it statewide work in many other counties, and I will continue to support the state investment into these programs. In fact, one of the loopholes I think that needs to be looked at is that some of the counties want to be able to, on the fifth OWI, instead of automatic jail time, to possibly say either drug court or OWI court or jail, and give them one more chance. And I think that would also save some money for the jail, but if they mess up that time, then it's automatic jail. I also would say some transparency when it comes to property taxes. That was one of the big things I heard when I've done doors in the towns as well as Weston and Wausau. People are very concerned that their property taxes are going to go up this December. So I would look at that and be as transparent as you can. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to make a comment? Anybody else wish to make a comment? Anybody else wish to make a comment? If not, that closes the public hearing. We will now move on to the minutes of the October 14th and 22nd meetings. And I apologize, at the last meeting, we had talked about the October 14th minutes. We were going to look at trying to capture the language that Supervisor Marshall and Poole had made and amended. We did not do that, so that we can defer those minutes until the following meeting if you wish to do so. If you think we all got caught up in the activities of the last week in preparing for the budget. Or we can approve them. I think I think you were looking for additional clarity. It's hard to see
Yes.
you beyond.
Sorry. Yes, Mr.
Supervisor
Chair.
Poole, why don't you come up to the table?
I was looking for what the amendment was to be added to the minutes. So if we could delay the ones from the 14th, I believe October 14th, and I would move to approve the ones from October 22nd.
Is there a second from the committee? Second by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of approval of the minutes from the October 22nd meeting will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. 6 of the 7 members are here in person, and Supervisor Reynolds is participating remotely for the Human Resources, Finance, and Property Committee. Accepting Department of Energy grant funds, item 7B. Is that Chris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Effectively, this resolution is built around a Department of Energy grant, which the county was awarded to allow for a variety of projects, but we ultimately landed on a LED retrofit project for multiple county facilities. The nature of the grant is that it's a reimbursement after the project is complete, so this resolution outlines the way to fund it in the meantime, and then all funds expended as part of the project will then get reimbursed at the end. So it's really a procedural resolution, but happy to answer any questions if there are any.
Are there any questions of Deputy Administrator Holman? If not, what are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a motion to accept the Department of Energy grant funds of $78,300.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lambert. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the motion to accept the grant of $78,300 from the Department of Energy will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. Now we will move on to the budget amendments. So this is an opportunity. We have a number of amendments that have been offered. One amendment that was adopted by the committee prior to publication that will be before the county board. And all of these amendments will need to be approved by the county board tomorrow. So the issue before the committee is if you wish to take action, do you wish to support it, oppose it, or not take any action? Understanding that there will be a vote tomorrow that is the meaningful vote on those issues. Because of the way that the state law is written, basically after publication, the budget was frozen in time, and the county board is the only one that can officially amend it with or without a recommendation from this committee. But any member of the county board can offer amendments right up until the time that the budget is adopted. We encourage you not to do so because we need to make sure that the budget is balanced and to give our legal and finance team the opportunity to review them for appropriateness, accuracy, and compliance with the law. So how do you wish to proceed, we can take them in order, or we can take them as supervisors wish. I know that we do not have some of the authors here today. Why don't we start with taking them in order? We talked about Amendment 1. You want to talk about Amendments 2 and 3 relative to the adjustments? I think I offer those based upon requests from administration.
So amendment number 2 is to put, in the budget, we had the carryovers and transfers from the general fund budgeted in the appropriate accounts, but we didn't have the transfer from general fund budgeted. So this right here would just make it the account cleanup to be accurate for the budget. Number 3, originally when this was put into the budget, it was put in as a contra expenditure account. This just moves it from a contra expenditure into a revenue and expense account.
Are there any questions relative to either of those amendments? Chair Gibbs.
So, Sam, the way I understand it, this is general cleanup of what I would call accounting requirements to satisfy a balanced budget.
Correct.
Okay. With that understanding, I'll make a motion to approve amendments and recommend to the full board approval of amendments 2 and 3.
All right, any discussion? Is there a second? Supervisor Hart, second? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of recommending approval of amendments 2 and 3 will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no. That motion carries. Amendment 4, Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I did put the whereases to kind of put through my thinking. In reviewing North Central Healthcare's budget and their actuals for the year, I noticed that the pool was doing much better than it had in the past, which kudos to the management team. And I know that they're still even working on more opportunities to bring in additional revenue for that facility. However, the pool was originally built with $3 million of cash and $3 million in matching funds from donations, and was supposed to be not requiring a tax levy. However, right now we're in the budget is 350. Is it 2 or 356 of tax subsidy? Since they are running better than budget by about $192,000, I had requested that we subsidize them to a lesser degree by $150,000. But happy to answer any questions if you have.
Are there any questions? I know that Gary Olson from North Central Healthcare had requested the opportunity to speak. We can do that before or after a motion?
Now it's fine.
Gary,
Okay. Do you want me to sit here or come up there, Chair?
there is fine.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Marshall. I appreciate the kind words with how we are trying to make money with the pool. There was 2 things I wanted to address with this amendment and caution the board on. The first one is right now the budget does show that we are on projection to make $192,000, but the one thing that it's not showing in the monthly financials is a depreciation for the building. We wait till the end of the year to put that in. So when that goes in, it's around $269,000, so that will show actually a loss then. Now, when it comes to the depreciation of the building, the question comes is who really is overdoing any repairs to the building, either the windows, HVAC, the pool itself, on what needs to happen. The depreciation is putting money away for those. If the county's going to take that over, then we could have a discussion about changing that depreciation number for the future. But I think it would be premature to do that right now to make that decision. The other point that I think is even more prudent is that North Central is tasked with paying the debt payment, and that went up to $2.5 million in 2025, and we were able to do that. But one thing, when you look at our budget, it's a holistic budget. So then if $150,000 is taken from that, we did everything that we could to make sure that we made that $2.5 million. It's going to be tight. We have census numbers in that, and in the nursing home, our census number is kind of aggressive for next year, with the fact that we're having a hard time finding CNAs, and that $150,000 would be a forever loss, I'm guessing not just a one-time loss. That could end up being a forever loss, which could hurt us in making that debt payment in the future. So I can answer any questions with that, but I would just caution making this move right now with the uncertainties of making sure that North Central can make that debt payment.
Are there any questions for Mr. Olson? Supervisor Gisselman. Please, if you could grab him.
Wait till you have a mic, though, please.
So what exactly does this cut mean for the warm water pool?
The cut on it, if we cut the $150,000, then we would have to talk about the depreciation and repairs for the future, and then also debt payment, how that would come. Because in the end, that ends up being a Marathon County, payment that we would have to figure out.
I'm mostly talking about services, therapist hours with regard to the people using the pool. Many years ago, this created quite concern with regard to the service that Marathon County was providing through that warm water pool. $3 million of the community came forth and supported that pool, the building of that pool, a half and half match with the county. I'm just concerned about so what you're saying is that the services as such, the therapists, the hours, the lifeguarding, the lights, will not be affected as such by this cut?
Probably not, as long as we can do what we're doing this year and continue to do what we're doing this year. So.
And what about the future then?
The future is always hard to distinguish what's going to happen in the future. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. Whenever you have a cut, when you look at what North Central has for tax levy overall, we are your community programs. So per capita, what you pay for those programs is much less than other counties. So when you look at it as a whole, you always have to look at our budget as a whole. I know that we try to break apart the different parts of it, but in the end, it's the budget as a whole. So if we start to have other areas that have issues, we have to look at all areas. So there could be issues. I can't tell you what they would be.
But I'm just concerned about the past support that this community, and especially with regard to the therapy and the good things that are done, and I don't really want this to become another political issue like it was in the past. And I'm concerned about the cuts and what that would mean for the warm water pool and the people there that that use that service every day. That's my concern.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the thing, I also serve as the NCHC board chairman, and so when you look at the total overall picture of North Central Healthcare, and you look at any specific program, in order for NCHC to meet its obligations that it has diligently made efforts to increase its revenues, to be able to service the debt that it has agreed to service, it has to show profit in various programs. You do not generate $2.5 million in debt service without showing a profit on some of those programs. And so I caution people when we start talking about particular one program versus another, it doesn't take very much in change. It changed one or two potentially self-pay individuals in the nursing home, and you lose significantly much more than $150,000. And then that debt responsibility is still the county's. And so I caution us on looking at taking $150,000 out of one particular program when it's an allocation of the total overall picture. So because of that, I can't support the $150,000 cut, because effectively it turns around, and if they can't hit targets in just one other program, you lose more than that. Now, I would say that the management has done a very amicable job in moving and turning the financials around down at NCHC, but we've also increased the requirement that NCHC is obligated to pay over the next year. It was an increase of $500,000 of debt service. In 2026, we have another $500,000 increase in debt service. So the need to continue down the road of providing profit in the various programs that they run to be able to service that debt.
Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I do believe that last year was the first year that we did get a breakout of the county appropriation, the tax levy, and it was the first time that we saw that in the Aquatic Center was being subsidized. Like I said, it was originally sold as being totally self-sufficient. I did have a conversation with the financial director and was not told about depreciation and some year-end entries at that time. So at the time, it would appear that $150,000 was not too much to ask, given they were making money on this project or in this cost center. Thank you.
A question for Gary Olson. How did you allocate the cost for the depreciation and the cost for the building? Was there a formula?
Yes, there was a formula that they did. I'd have to ask our accountant on what they did, but there was a formula that they did to break down the costs. The pool, I think, was pretty easy because we knew just how much that was.
Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one question on what Chair Gibbs had stated before, and I just want to understand if I'm hearing it correctly, what the statement was, and it was something to the effect of, I caution cutting one program without thinking about how it affects the entirety, and I may have maybe a line item or whatever. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if that's accurate, I guess then the question becomes, why do we have this resolution process at all? Because when we put forth resolutions, we are required to talk to finance and try to find specific singular items that we're going to move money between. Why don't we just have a process where we state, I would like to reduce the proposed budget by 1%. Now the administration figure it out. Thank you.
Other questions? So, questions, comments? What are your? Go ahead, Supervisor.
So my question would be, for the remaining debt service for North Central Healthcare, how long is that payment schedule? How many years? Because we're talking about putting money away in a depreciation fund, so that way we can cover building maintenance costs. So based on what our debt service payments are, if we didn't put that money in a depreciation fund for those later renovations and upkeep and building maintenance, could we forego some of that, make sure we keep track of paying the debt service, and then once those payments are no longer required to pay off the debt, at that point you can start building the renovation fund?
Can I answer that, Chair? Or?
Go ahead.
Okay. Well, the payments go out like past 30 years. So if we do that I would caution against that. So especially with my years as finance director of Langwade County, that's kicking the can down the road, which will end up costing you more in the long run. So you want to make sure that you put money aside so that you're ready to go when you have that, because if you wait 30 years, the chances that things are going to break between now and 30 years, that just isn't going to happen. That's why we usually do a 5-year KIP plan so that we have that. Because the other thing that you have to look at too is that Pinecrest is for sale right now. Lincoln County is looking at selling Pinecrest, and we have overhead that is allocated to Pinecrest that happened when they did that. So when we lose Pinecrest, it's actually going to cost us more money in the end because we won't be able to put all that overhead to it. So that's a concern I have also. And if we cut this 150,000, I'm starting 150,000 in the hole. When we, like what Chairman Gibbs said, the holistic look at North Central, when you look at our whole budget, bottom line, that's what we're going for in our budget. And a lot of times because of census, it moves around in different areas, especially with the nursing home. I don't know if that answers your question. So
That does, and having the schedule up on the board here helps.
Thank
just
you.
so I know that date. Thank you.
So if I can just expound, great question. It's on page 16 and 17 of the county's budget. The page on 16 that Supervisor Jensen just referenced is a summary of that, the debt, bonds, and notes as it relates to the, what we'll call the Lakeview projects. And you'll see, as was referenced before, the debt schedule essentially, this summary table is that ramping up of debt service that we anticipate and hope, or I should say that perhaps the other way around, hope and anticipate that North Central is able to service as we move forward. Again, these projections were developed through the use of an accounting firm going back to 2017 and 18, prior to the pandemic. So not making excuses certainly, but those are this summary schedules. The individual debt schedules for all of the outstanding county debt are on the ensuing page, page 17 of the budget presentation. And you can see those are called out. The specific projects relative to the healthcare center are called out as GO, or general obligation healthcare project building bonds. And those, again, start in 2020 was when the borrowing took place for those notes, but they continue through 2022. The summary schedule, because North Central was unable to meet the projected, or required, I should say, debt service obligation, the full debt service obligation, last year, this year, and through 2027. This schedule is essentially the result of discussions between North Central leadership in the county, with the understanding that essentially through every budget process, North Central would build their budget and tell us what debt they can service. And as was kind of alluded to, that really drives the conversation, because at the end of the day, the debt is held in Marathon County's name. But those are the summary schedules within the budget.
What are any other questions or comments relative to the motion? If not, what are your wishes relative to the amendment? What are your wishes? What are your wishes? If there's no motion, it'll be advanced to the county board without a recommendation. All right, we'll move on to Amendment 5, which was offered by Supervisor Sandelsky, who's not here, relative to the OWI court. Go ahead.
I'm on public safety, and we oversee OWI and drug court. And the OWI court has two people in it. and we were funded at full capacity, and I understand why Tim wrote this. I just saw it when I was looking at my packet. There definitely, I think there needs to be a little more oversight, because the DA is not district attorney office is not part of the OWI court or drug court. And I believe Tim put this in here. I didn't talk to him, so I don't know, but we're funding it at 100%, but we only have 2 people in there. And so you have drug court and alcohol court. Drug court, I believe, has a full slate of people in it right now. So was there 25? But alcohol court has 2. And that's why this was brought up, is because of the number of people that we're servicing with the money that we're putting in. And right now, is it 4, after the 4th OWI, it's automatic jail time, and they can't participate in this program? Okay, so it's...
Generally, when there's silence, I try to jump in with an answer. I would defer to the judges in the back, but mandatory prison for 5th and beyond OWIs is the law that was changed some time ago, yes.
And a question I had is, how much of the money is actually being intermingled from OWI court to drug court?
That's a really good question, and that was a comment that was made at Public Safety when we talked about the budgets for these programs, that right now, and when you look at the amendment, those are the breakdowns, and thank you to Sam for assisting in the drafting of that. There, for example, we have, and I'll defer to Laura and Judge O'Neill, but we have individuals that are within our OWI treatment court. It's very limited. We have housing that we have signed leases for, and we have the grant for drug court that supports some of that housing cost. OWI court has been not grant funded for some time. But to your point, if we have an individual in drug court that needs housing, we don't view the housing for OWI court fundamentally separately from the housing for drug court. And it's important to note that in the grant for drug court, not trying to get too far in the weeds, but the grant funding for drug court is about $150,000 we receive as of right now. We utilize as in-kind match funding that we utilize for our other treatment court, historically the OWI court. To your point about the population, that law has changed, and the court system needs to, that partnership, whether it's everyone within all the stakeholders in the justice system, we need to find, if there's a desire to continue funding it, we can't fund 2 people. That is not a good use of funds. The courts, as I understand it, and again, I would defer to Judge O'Neill, but my understanding is the general direction right now is, because drug court is going well, we just made a presentation, staff made a presentation to the Public Safety Committee relative to data and outcomes. I think it was received well, to take that and create essentially another drug court, separate the drug court population, male and female, because that is best practice. And I see the judges are nodding their heads, that's their intent. But do we have a sufficient population? I think I would defer to the experts on whether or not they believe that to exist. But if it doesn't pan out, absolutely the county board, 2 people's not enough.
Is there, without objection, could somebody from the courts address the current population in the OWI court to give you your answer?
Thank you for this opportunity to explain a little bit to answer your question. I think we all agree that a court should not exist to service 2 people. And we were kind of thrust into this situation because it changed in the legislation. The funding, I guess we have been working under the theory that the funding is really for treatment courts in general. And it's our understanding that the OWI court funding is being utilized, for example, as Administrator Leonard indicated, for housing. Just about every person that enters the drug treatment recovery court has got to have housing. They do not have a place to go. They don't have family at this point in their lives to support them. So almost every participant gets into a county-funded housing. Without the OWI court funding, we don't believe we would have that housing, which then sets people up somewhat for failure, because if they don't have a stable, sober environment to go to, we're kind of strapped. Then as to Administrator Leonard's point about the matching funds, we don't want to lose the TAD grant funding. That is $150,000 that the state is giving us, but we need to match that. And we've been relying upon the OWI treatment court funds for that matching. So there has been some overlay of each of those funding resources, but from a criminal justice perspective, treatment courts are treatment courts. And whether your addiction is alcohol-based, if it's methamphetamine-based, if it's heroin-based, it is a substance use disorder that needs treatment. And we separate them out because best practice is to treat them somewhat differently, because those addicted to alcohol have issues different than those addicted to illicit substances. So that's how our model has been. But both courts really operate under the same national standards as to how to treat people in general treatment courts. We recognized a year ago that because of the change in legislation, we needed to change our population, and we have been meeting, although in full disclosure, we have not met in the last 6 months, as to how to best draw more people into the courts. But what we would like to do, our operating theory right now is, again, as is mentioned by Administrator Leonard, best practice is also to separate males and females. Because if you probably haven't ever been to a drug treatment court before, but you're welcome to come if you'd like to take a look. We can get you that opportunity. But as a treatment court judge, I ask every individual every week to share some of the most private, intimate parts of their lives. And to have a female who may have been the victim of domestic violence to be exploring those feelings and those emotions in front of males is not best practice. So we would ultimately like to expand and have a court designated for women and a court designated for men. And I think that we have that population in this county. We need to get them enrolled and active into the program. We're working on that. But I don't think, I think Judge Moran and Judge Corbett would agree, we really don't think the money that's being allocated to the general treatment court funds is not worthy of that funding. Treatment courts are the solution to addiction that we found, and the data has supported that our treatment courts are very successful. We are saving jail bed days. We're keeping people off the streets into the community. They're becoming employed throughout the program. They're becoming active members in our society. They're reunited with their families. They're getting their children back. We've had some women give birth during the program. They still have their children. So, I can go on and on about drug and treatment courts. But collectively, we have seen the changes in people's lives, and we do think that it's a worthy funding. So did you have any other questions? I know, I just kind of went on.
The only thing I want to bring up is that in order to get information, the Public Safety Committee really had a push. It wasn't just given to us. We were supposed to get a meeting in July where the information was given to us, and it was skipped, and we had a push to get it in September. And then we had another October meeting to make sure that we were given information on what was going on. And it should have been brought to us, we shouldn't be pushing for it, and that's when we finally started getting some answers. But I just wanted to bring that up because there's a reason why this was brought up, because with the two people and some of the feedback we were getting initially wasn't very good. That was brought up, and I didn't know now why he brought it up, but thank you.
Any other discussion, questions, comments on this amendment? Chair Gibbs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I serve on the CJCC, as do many of the Public Safety Chair, the Health and Human Services Committee Chair, and we had some discussions about treatment court and sustainability. I also happen to serve on the NACO board, and know that best practices nationally are treatment courts. And if we're going to have meaningful change to citizens that have addiction problems, it is really and several years ago, we had at a public safety committee meeting, we had several people that presented to the committee about how life-changing the court was to them personally and to the successes that they had in society. So because of that, and because the CJCC clearly recommends continued funding for the treatment courts, I would make a motion that we not recommend Amendment 5 to the full board.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Lemmer. Any discussion on the motion not to recommend it? Again, these items can be considered with or without a recommendation of the committee. So, Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just to clarify, this did go through public safety, and they did agree to fund it
They made no recommendation to change it.
in the regular budget talks.
I believe that they did not take any action on defunding it.
Okay.
So
And then we just had an opioid settlement fund educational presentation, and I do believe in there it really talked about strengthening those courts. So to me, this goes contrary to what some of our other information is showing, and so that's why I can agree not to send this forward, because I think it is contrary to some of our other goals that we are trying to put forth going forward.
any other discussion on the motion not to recommend? If not, all those in favor of the motion not to recommend will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose? That motion carries, but not unanimously. Next amendment is offered by Supervisor Marshall, Amendment 6. Do you want to?
Yeah, at the last meeting, at the public hearing, I had asked what was budgeted for fines and interest, since we are undertaking tax deeded property aggressively this year. And Sam had shared that we have the same budget this year, or this coming year, as we had last year. Year to date, we're about $600,000 better than budget so far in 2024. And I had asked the treasurer to look at what she thought would be a possible add to this, and she agreed that we should be easily seeing $250,000 more than was originally budgeted. So this has the support of the county treasurer. Thank you.
Are there any questions or comments? Any questions or comments? If not, Chair Gibbs?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank first Supervisor Marshall for bringing this to light, because I did also do some additional research as to the amount of dollars that are collected for the delinquent taxes and the penalties. So as people may or may not know, when taxes are delinquent, it is 1% per month, and there's a 0.5% per month penalty for late payment. And that continues to accrue throughout. And so in looking at the aggressiveness that, or actually let's more specifically state the appropriate concern that has been placed on delinquent taxes and the movement to actually collect additional taxes, I would be in support of this amendment to moving it to the full board for consideration.
Chair would just like to interject that this has been a thorn in our side for quite some time, and we've been looking at efforts to try to streamline the process of addressing tax delinquent property, and it is in no one's interest to let property go until it is taken by the county. And I think the administrator is working on a number of initiatives relative to notifying people of delinquency. We changed the county ordinance to allow for tax deed and NREM process, which allows us to handle them in a bulk setting, working with the courts. That NREM process has resulted in, there were 50 parcels that were part of that initial batch, working through the treasurer, the corporation council. 32 of them settled their taxes, or we addressed those, so we took title to 18. But I think it showed that by being aggressive, we can also keep those homes in the hands of the property owners. And one of the reasons is that there is a more aggressive, well, it comes from the court instead of the county treasurer's office, and the banks are notified, and I think that they've put some pressure on. But it will take additional effort, which is why we offered Amendment 1 to try to provide a limited time help to deal with it. We also have the issue of how do we, it isn't that we take the taxes, because that doesn't generate any money. It is in the tax sales. And with tax delinquency, we sell those through surplus property, Wisconsin surplus property, but because of some recent court cases in Act, I think 207, we have responsibilities where any excess proceeds over what those back taxes are returned to the owner. So there is some additional administrative burden associated with it. I too support this amendment, and I think it's consistent with the effort that the committee has undertaken to try to address this backlog issue. Chair Gibbs.
Just again, I want to thank Supervisor Marshall for bringing this forward, because I think this effectively will reduce the tax burden to the taxpayers by 1.6 cents per thousand evaluation.
Any other discussion? If not, what are your wishes? Supervisor Marshall? Is there a second? Second by Supervisor Poole. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor of the amendment will signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries unanimously. All right, we will now move on to Amendment 7, offered by Supervisor Hoppe. She could not be here today.
Between Sam and I think she had the opportunity to speak with each of us, and I would defer to Corp Counsel on any of the legal issues, but her intent was to, as you can see from the amendment, was reduce the revenue coming in from the vehicle registration fee and instead replace that with revenue via a transfer from the highway fund balance. From a legal perspective, and I'd ask Mike to jump in, the conversation we had with Supervisor Hoppe was that any action with respect to the vehicle registration fee requires action by the county, separate action by the county board, because there's an ordinance with respect to that vehicle registration fee. However, in speaking with Supervisor Hoppe, she understood that, and her rationale that she asked that I share with the group today was that it would be in anticipation of the board taking that additional action. But anything I missed, Sam or Mike? Nope. Okay. And Mike, do you want to elaborate on the legal piece?
Sure, if Mr. Chair is comfortable with that.
Go ahead.
Okay. I think Administrator Leonard did outline that pretty succinctly and correctly. You have a county ordinance in your general code of ordinances that establishes the vehicle registration fee, the wheel tax, and this amendment would remove the revenue from that wheel tax from the county's budget and replace that revenue for highway funding with a transfer from fund balance. The ordinance itself is still on the books, so that wheel tax will continue to be collected. The state will still get its portion. You would need to take an action. The county board would need to take an action to repeal that ordinance in order to stop collecting that wheel tax.
you can remove it from the budget in anticipation of that action. Just there would be another step that would need to be taken as well.
And I believe I haven't looked at the ordinance or the statute, or the administrative code, but my recollection is it's a 90-day notice that the state requires relative to termination of that ordinance, but don't hold me to that.
I will confirm that and share it in a few minutes.
Any discussion? Chair Gibbs.
Well, first off, I think we've had some clarity around what is in fund balances and what is not in fund balances, and what is allocated. I want to first thank the administrator and the finance director for getting that memo out to all of the taxpayers, all of the supervisors on the board for clarification. I think there's an opportunity, and I had the opportunity to attend the infrastructure committee meeting last week. And I think there was a profound understanding that there's some dollars in the highway fund that need to have better clarity around and better commitment. Before we start reducing revenue, I think we need to have those discussions. And before we start reducing revenue in a budget, we better be clear that the board wants to take the action to repeal the registration fee. Because there's clearly needs to be a profound understanding of what the impacts would be of reducing $3 million. And I want to illustrate that by simply understanding what the cost of money is, because we talk about, and this board and the infrastructure committee has been supportive of a potential new highway shop to the tune of roughly $59 million, at least the last discussions were. And setting aside some of these highway reserve funds for that will reduce, if the board takes action to do that, will reduce, and you utilize some of these highway reserves to reduce the bonding requirement. It is significantly different in cost of money. And what I mean by that is simply this, is currently the $25 registration fee has an administration cost that is imposed by the state, and that is 3 cents. 3 cents. So when I pay the $25 on my vehicle, or my wife pays her $25 and I make her pay her own, but in this case, when we pay that $25, the county receives $24.97. Now, if we were to bond for that and use bonding to get that same amount, effectively the registration fee generates roughly $3 million. And that cost in administration cost is $3,600. If you were to bond for that for the highway structure over a 20-year period, and assuming a 4% interest rate, your payment instead of the $25, yes, will be $1.84 per month, or per year for 20 years, effectively making that cost $36.79. And the total of interest repaid on that bonding amount is $1,414,905.05. Now, I did not put anything in for bond counsel and or bonding costs that are additional fees. So I think we need to have a meaningful discussion, and I think the consensus was at infrastructure was that HR Finance Committee and the Infrastructure Committee would actually sit down and look at the appropriate amount of reserve, where it belongs, and I think they've actually even scheduled a meeting to have that discussion. So I think it is a little bit premature to make a budget amendment on a potential action that the board may take without having total understanding of what those impacts are to the taxpayers. Because if a taxpayer, when I posed this question to taxpayers that I have had discussions with, what would you rather do? Pay $25 for the registration fee, or pay $36.79 in total cost, which includes the interest over a 20-year period at $1.84 per year? They have all said, at least the ones that I've talked to, have said they'd much rather pay the $25. So I can't support this at this point. I would preface that with, let's have a true understanding of all of the implications of something of this magnitude at this late point. But I do truly appreciate the discussion about what sets in that highway fund, and let's have an honest and meaningful discussion of what the appropriate levels are and what is the appropriate allocation, if any, of those funds to a new highway shop in the potential future. Thank you.
I did, after the Infrastructure Committee meeting, reach out to Supervisor Pfeffert, who's the chair. Supervisor Dickinson was acting as chair while he was gone, and he agreed to a joint meeting. We were hoping to have that yet this calendar year for the purposes of having that discussion. But I would like to point out that if the vehicle registration fee is repealed, that is an annual hole in our budget of $3 million. And so you would have to look, if you're borrowing to replace that, it goes up by $3 million every year if we choose to fund it that way. And that money is currently going into bituminous in our capital improvement plan. So keep that in mind. But I think the discussion on the future of it is a worthwhile discussion, as well as the discussion of how those reserves are used. There's an assumption that a good portion of the highway reserves will go for the new facility, but that has not been articulated to a policy as of yet, and I think that needs to be done. We've also been spending down those reserves for projects, taking advantage of some of the federal funding opportunities that are out there. Other questions or comments? Or Corp Counsel Pruner.
I just wanted to follow up and confirm there is a 90-day notice requirement. So if a county repeals a county vehicle registration fee ordinance, it has to notify the Department of Transportation at least 90 days prior to the first day of the month in which the repeal is effective. So that just confirming that that is the correct understanding. That's in the administrative code for any judges or former corp counsels who are in the room. It's Trans 12602, sub 8.
Or former. Any other comments? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I did have the pleasure of chairing that infrastructure committee meeting last week, and it was very good conversation, lots of good input. When it comes to the wheel tax, when it was imposed in 2016, I do think it's important to state that at no point at that time and no point since has there ever been a statement to say that those funds would go to a new highway shop. There just hasn't been a discussion. If it is now, that's fine. And when you're talking about using $30 million in reserves of the highway department to help bring down the cost of a $59 million shop, I understand the arguments in doing that. But as I've stated now in a couple meetings, and I think it's important to always restate this, that taxes are supposed to be designated for specific uses, and that can include debt and that can include capital improvement projects. But the continual movement of money that isn't spent within a budget that then builds up reserves in any fund, for any department, whether it be highway or the general or library or whatever it might be, is a concerning action that government typically takes. And so the discussion, I look forward to having that discussion further because it needs to happen. We can tighten our budgets. I've felt that ever since I've been on the board for 4+ years now. And the other thing is infrastructure made no recommendation. We didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel comfortable kind of encouraging that, especially with two persons not being in that meeting. It doesn't say that we wouldn't, people on that board would not agree to a cut like this. Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When I look back at audited statements in 2018, we had $50 million in the highway fund. At the end of last year, we have $64 million in the highway fund. We have grown that fund by $14 million from 2018. So this is not a one-time rollover of $3 million. We continually over budget in the highway department and roll money over. So to Supervisor Dickinson's point, I think it's time to look at being more accurate with our budgeting so that we do not continually roll money over without an undesignated purpose. Because we did not make a policy decision that we need to over budget to fund a building.
Go ahead, Supervisor Jensen.
Thank you, Chair. I guess the only thing I'll bring up for this body is in the last infrastructure meeting, they talked about how we've been able to leverage a lot of state funding for these road projects, which probably has helped us accrue that highway fund, especially over the last few years. I think the number was 80 cents out of every dollar spent came from state funding. So I think that's helped us, build that highway fund. So I'm kind of approaching this topic with a little caution that if those funding sources dry up, what will that look like for us as we do continue our road maintenance projects? And if there's any state legislatures, individuals listening, I hope that they do keep up with that shared funding of these projects. So that way we can help our local constituents fund these roads. So thank you.
I'd just like to interject that Highway Commissioner Griesbach has been very aggressive in advancing projects in the county. And one of the things that the Infrastructure Committee has been looking at is a 2050 plan modeled after what Washington County did, and trying to look at the life cycle of roads and making sure that we've got enough funding to address replacement of roads and bridges. And surprisingly, we are underfunded when you begin to look into the future. And the likelihood that we'll have the same amount of federal funding beyond 2026 is probably remote, because there was a significant infusion of dollars into infrastructure associated with the bipartisan infrastructure law and other initiatives. And again, we've captured that. In addition, there was state funding through local improvement funds, LRIP and AG funds. And if those continue, it is great, but our needs, we have the most highway miles of any county in the state. Our ability to support them will be diminished if we take, the $3 million is going for bituminous. It doesn't go into reserves. It is the other operations that go into reserves, but I think a good discussion, informal policy by the county board relative to the use of those reserves would be in order. But I don't think I think you need to do that when all of the cards are on the table, not when you take a couple of them away. Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a piece of knowledge. I don't know if this fact is important or operative or not. I just reached out to Commissioner Griesbach relative to our implementation in light of the 90-day notice requirement that was confirmed. Marathon County implemented the wheel tax according to Commissioner Griesbach in July of 2016. So I don't know if it's operative for you if there is the conversation about terminating it to coincide with that date as to not have certain individuals pay multiple times, although I think I'm probably the only person still driving the same car from 2016. But just one piece of knowledge from Commissioner Griesbach.
Any other discussion? Questions? Chair Gibbs.
Well, just one other comment. I know the financial statement shows that the highway fund balance is at $64,230,213 as of 12/31/23. But as the finance director clearly points out, $7,985,075 of those are depreciable assets. Those are plow trucks. Those are things that cannot be spent. We also have $7 million set aside in working capital. We have in reserve and capital replacement, and then working capital at $3,400,000. So the remaining unassigned is $45 million, not 64. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? If not, what are your wishes? Again, make a recommendation to support, oppose, or no recommendation. What are your wishes? What are your wishes? Chair Gibbs.
Well, in light of the discussion, I would, and the commitment by the HR Finance Committee Chair and the Infrastructure Committee Chair to have a meaningful discussion and develop policy around the potential and explore the potential costs and ramifications of including or eliminating the registration fee long-term. I would make a motion that the Finance Committee not support the amendment at this time, but understanding that there's a commitment by those two committees to discuss and come up with a formal policy.
Is there a second? Seconded by Supervisor Limmer. Any discussion on the motion? Any discussion on the motion? All right, if not, all those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed, no? That motion carries, but not unanimously. All right, we had an amendment offered by Supervisor, what, my guardian angel, or, so if you'd like to explain that?
Thank you.
Sorry.
Following phone calls last night and emails, some of my constituents would like me to offer a budget amendment that we transfer $1 million from the fund balance to the transfer it from the debt service. This is not my forte, I'm sorry. And then that would decrease the revenue. They were reading about the $64 million that we had. It was written online, and I think that maybe it's possible that not everybody understands why we have so much money in the budget. And so I just think that we need to talk about it. So this was the amendment that I'm proposing, that we then decrease the revenue in the 2025 budget for debt service by subtracting the $1 million from general property tax levy.
Any questions, comments relative to the motion? Chair Gibbs.
Well, I'll try to summarize, I think, what the finance director tried to clarify based on the starting point of the December 31st, 2023 financial statements. So starting with the general fund on the budgeted, on the audited statement shows $47,650,821. But when you go through and actually look at the statement that is provided by the, and provide clarity around that, you clearly find out that that 47 million is not all effectively spendable dollars. The reality is there is $6,622,359 of remaining unassigned working capital. Then you go to the social fund. The social improvement fund has been reported that there's $6,042,170 in that fund. And the statement, and this is just to verify that the reality is that the unassigned is a negative balance of $168,134. Now, as we just got done talking about the Highway Reserve Fund or Highway Fund, yes, there is $45,835 and $885, or $885 in that fund. But we also look at the total overall picture of the county. We have an enterprise fund, that being the solid waste department. And to provide context around, one of the things that we're required to do is we're required to set aside dollars when we open up a cell to receive garbage, or we are required to set aside long-term closure and maintenance, along with, long-term and closure maintenance funds. So right now, the solid waste facility enterprise has an unfunded liability of $9,280,405. Now, these are as of, again, 12/31/2023. Board action, so all of the 2024's transactions are not reflected in those balances. One of the things that this board took action on was it took $8 million of reserve and dedicated it to the Bug Tussle project. So when you take those all into context, what I would call the unassigned dollars are $35,009,705. And we've just talked about having a meaningful discussion around the registration fee, whether we continue it, whether we don't continue it, what we set aside for highway infrastructure building or future commitment of projects. And I will state one thing, we don't have any other transactions that happened in 2024 reflected in any of those numbers. This board took action when the board approved the 2024 budget to spend roughly $4 million down of highway reserves. It also has projects on the horizon in 2026 and 2027 of an additional $4 million. And so I caution people on taking down our reserves to a level that is below our ordinance as far as working capital, because this, by board action, when we spent the $8 million, that's coming out of working capital. It's not available. If we were to fund the solid waste liability, unfunded liability that's there, there's another $9 million gone. And yet we haven't even taken into consideration, and I don't know where the fund balances are at this point, but I know that we haven't taken those into consideration. And the board gave direction when we built this budget to spend down additional reserves. So I can't support taking $1 million, and that would effectively leave the unrestricted along with taking into consideration the $8 million that has been spent, it would take the general fund below the working capital reserve requirement that we have in our operating fund.
Any other comments? Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to piggyback off of what Chair Gibbs has said, I feel a lot of confusion around some of this budget work because I don't understand necessarily the ramifications. What does it mean to take $1 million here and put it over there, and then what's the consequences, the cascading consequences that come from doing that? And part of that is because we just do not have a lot of financial analysis done at the HRFP level, and it doesn't get done at the other committee levels. And I think it would be helpful if we really could know and understand what the overall strategy is. I assume there is a strategy, and then stick to it. But we have to have the financials. We've got to have comparables. We've got to understand from the 2024 audit what is projected to the 2025, what was the actual, how are we doing? We never go back and say, this is where we're at with the budget. We're over budget here, we're under budget there, and it would just be helpful for me because some of this information that we received, now I'm regretting some of the previous votes that I've taken to allocate monies elsewhere because I feel like I have part of the story, not the whole story. So I agree. I would not recommend this going forward at this point, but I think we do need to have purposeful conversations all year long so that we can make good decisions and feel comfortable that we're not begging for information and we're not being hoodwinked into something that might or might not be happening.
Chair Robinson,
Go.
this is Supervisor Mask.
Go ahead.
Thank you. And I agree with Supervisor Lemmer. It is very confusing. But one thing I know after running a business is you have to budget money. And when you budget money, you have reserves. And those reserves look like you have a lot of money in your reserves that is spendable, but is not. So please keep in mind that reserves pay the bills. Thanks.
Any Supervisor or Chair Gibbs.
Just the one other thing I would mention. I mean, one of the things that the bond rating agencies utilize and look at pretty aggressively and want to understand is if you have a working capital reserve policy, and then you start deviating from that with changes, that may or may not affect your bond rating. And one of the things that is a little bit concerning to me is we haven't explored what these potential amendments have as far as impact on our bond rating and what that would mean to additional costs to the taxpayers in bonding costs if we do effectively at some point go down to bonding. We have a strategy historically. I've been on this board now almost 19 years, and we have historically had a practice that we take and roll over our CIP, or roll over unspent funds that are budgeted into a CIP fund to maintain the property that the county taxpayers entrusted in us to maintain. And that has been the policy throughout. If we want to move to a policy that says, no, we want to move more closely to budgeting everything to the very, very penny, and then turn around and bond when we need to buy property, improve property, replace plow trucks, replace paving machines, That's a great discussion to have, and we haven't had that discussion to change that direction at this point. But I'm willing to have those discussions, but let's understand what those ramifications are and to actually truly understand what that impact is long-term to the taxpayers of Marathon County. Because we can't do it in a vacuum. We must do it with all transparency in front of everyone. Thank you.
I think it's something we need to do with our financial advisors' input and involvement in that. Supervisor Lemmer raises a good point relative to our tracking and monitoring of expenditures as we go, and I think we're on course to get there. We are not quite there in practice. I think the system is finally giving us that capability, and once we get beyond the legacy or the remnants of the Kayenta accounting system, we'll be able to give you a little bit better information. But last year we had committed to try to track down all the fund balances and policies. We started that process, and with the departure of Christie, we lost some momentum, and because of the glitches in the system and other things, I'm still committed to do that, so we have an understanding of what each and every one of those fund balances is, how it was created, what its parameters are, how those funds can be used, and what controls there are over those. I think that's critical for the board to have confidence in understanding of what those fund balances are and how they can be used going forward. So we will do that. Administrator Leonard and I had that discussion this morning again, and we will engage the committee in those discussions going forward. Supervisor Marshall.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think it's important to point out that over the last 2 years, we've allocated $26 million of ARPA money. We did a lot of catch-up. We did a lot of capital improvement projects. I don't see the need being consistent with that level of capital in the future. I did have, like I said, 3 questions. One is, in May, we sold 3 properties, Chadwick Street, Heather Street, and Plum Drive. How is that recorded? Since we didn't anticipate selling those, that wouldn't be in the budget. Is that something that's going to roll over next year?
I'll let Sam talk to where it is in the financials, but my recollection of the 2 of those properties were the properties that were utilized for community-based residential facilities that were previously operated by North Central Healthcare. So via the board's sale, the proceeds from those sales were set aside to be used for future debt service. And my recollection was those total sale proceeds was $500,000. I see Gary nodding his head. But in terms of where they're recorded in the financials, I'll let Sam speak to that. The other property, if you can refresh my recollection, Chadwick, Heather, and
Heather and Chadwick were the community-based properties, Plum Drive in Wausau.
And I believe that was sold to Habitat for Humanity, and the proceeds, I'll again let Sam talk to where they're receipted, but I want to say that was sold for $1,000.
Yeah, I was more interested in the ones that were sold for $500,000.
Any follow-up, Sam? Are you looking?
I'm really sorry. I haven't looked into that just yet. I'll continue to look.
My initial thought, and don't hold me to it, but we'll look, would be that would it be receipted in the general fund? But it did have, again, the $500,000 property transactions where there was a...
Can we report on that tomorrow night? Get an answer for tomorrow night's meeting?
Yeah, and I can confirm the resolution.
Okay, thank you. Also, the working capital policy that I was able to find was in the annual comprehensive financial report, the last one that was done in 2018. And it says that working capital is never to go below 8.5% of operating expenditures. The $29.8 million in the general fund for working capital seems to be above that number. If I could get an explanation how we came up with 29.8 million.
Sam?
So the calculation takes all of the expenditures for the year, divides it by 8.5%, and whatever is below or above it, that's where that number comes from. So the working capital that you see for the 29 million would include the general fund, the grants fund, the capital improvements fund, and the social improvements fund. So we do hold that money in the general fund under the working capital.
Okay, thank you. And then I would also like to ask, so when we underspend in our employee benefits fund, I know that in 2023, we underspent and it increased the employee benefits fund by $1 million. And that was pointed out by our, in the August meeting with John Rader, that fund had increased to $11.4 million. So is there a possibility of using 11.4 or some degree of that for this resolution?
I'll have to talk with Sam on what my understanding of the employee benefits fund, and I don't speak finance, but a lot of it is restricted and non-spendable. As I put in my email to you, my understanding is how, when we have attrition, how that impacts the employee benefit fund. The employee benefit fund essentially operates as an independent insurance fund. And rather than tax levy being allocated specifically to that fund at the beginning of the year and being transferred, the premium costs, when those come due each and every month, it's a withholding out of payroll for the employee share, and the employer share is transferred. But I'll let Sam talk, but certainly budget to actual is different, as I wrote in my response to you.
That is correct. That the insurance premiums come over in the payroll process to serve as the revenue source for the insurance premiums being paid. And then also the some of the internal administrative costs as well.
So if the fund is growing, because if I pull out 2018 and I look at non-major governmental funds, it had a balance of 1.8 million, and maybe that's not titled correctly, but if it is growing, how do you use that fund if it is restricted? Does that mean that it's possible for you to charge out at a lower rate to departments in the future? If we had a rollover of $1 million, how are we going to utilize that in the future?
In that fund is 3 categories. You have your health insurance, dental, and vision insurance that are in there. You have your workers' comp and your property and casualty insurance. So the fund balance is between those 3 divisions. I'd have to look specifically, but health insurance will be restricted to health insurance. I'd have to look a little bit further into how you would use it if it was all health insurance or medical, dental, vision, versus if it was attributable to workers' comp or whether it was because of property and casualty insurance.
And I would just add, relative to health insurance, the goal, if you were self-funded, I think to your, one of the positive opportunities that would exist if you were self-funded would be to do exactly what you just said. If you had a sufficient balance such that your reserve policy was met and you were confident as confident as you can be relative to predicting the health insurance market, you would have as other counties have, a premium holiday. You essentially don't charge both the organization and the individual for the premiums for maybe the last month of the year. I know other counties have, not many, but I know of one county that had a long-standing positive reserve relative to being self-funded. Being fully insured through GHT, I think we're in a different position. I'll have to confer with Sam. I also have not looked at that in detail to see what options we have to dip into those funds. I know a fair amount of funds that we utilize out of the employee benefits fund, and I'll have to talk with Sam about this, relate to flexible spending accounts that people elect but then don't fully make use of. and that don't roll over. There, again, are restrictions on those, the utilization of those funds, and my understanding is they have to be used in a way that is for the benefit of all employees, which wouldn't be a benefit necessarily through tax levy, but we can certainly look into that. I just don't know that off the top of my head.
Chair Gibbs.
Sam, isn't there also a amount of that's set aside in that, inside that fund because we are self-funded for workman's comp?
Correct.
And then also, isn't there some in that fund that is set aside for our deductibles under our liability policies and replacement of property?
Correct.
Okay.
Any other questions? Supervisor Dickinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The process is certainly better than it's been, and I look forward to next year that there can be these things addressed before it gets so late in the game, because then it becomes a very combative, I think, kind of argumentative deal where people are just trying to do the will of the people and take care of, you know, our government, right? Our administration, our employees and such. The idea, just a couple thoughts that come to mind, you know, we're talking about these reserves. In that process, if you say, well, let's reduce taxes, there tends to be a no. If you say, let's reduce reserves, there tends to be a no. There are a couple times we've had the past couple of years where there's agreement. We've had some today as well, right? But again, there's that kind of combative, well, you don't understand or something like that, right? I don't know if people mean that, but that's what it feels like. When you're using reserves throughout the year, and then you're putting in additional money back in reserves, that cycle, something's off there. You're taking in too much money, putting it in reserves, and then saying, well, we're going to use reserves because we don't have enough. Well, there's a balance there that should be addressed. Reserves aren't bad. I don't think anyone is saying that we shouldn't have a CIP fund and such. I don't think anyone ever is stating that, and no one is saying put us in a position of reducing the bond rating or putting us in jeopardy. But as a couple of the gentlemen who had spoken earlier, there are people out there suffering, and all we have done year after year is take more money out of their pocket. That is what's happening. The mill rate is going down or whatever, but with the valuations the past 3 years being through the roof, people are taking more money out of their pocket. And I would hope that we can be mindful of that, and especially the HR Finance Committee, because of the responsibility you have, and really look into and consider that. Thank you.
I would just like to interject relative to process. And this year, the budget came in late, again, because of the system. And again, Administrator and I, Leonard and I have had a discussion about trying to get that to the county board in September versus October, so that the board members and committee and public will have additional time to review and comment on the budget. I think that would be helpful for all of us. And so your points are well taken. Other,
If I may, Mr. Chair, I completely agree with Vice Chair Dickinson. And a lot of all the comments that have been made, I much prefer to have a dialogue that is not the day before you all have to approve a budget. That doesn't serve anyone. And our process can certainly be improved. This policy that Marathon County has had and that's operating, I mean, our working capital reserve policy goes back to 1995. It was talked about at the Infrastructure Committee. And we have an ordinance on the books that says we strive for pay-as-you-go financing, which is all well and good. But I think it lends itself to we should look at that. The board should look at that. At the end of the day, it's a purely policy decision for the board. the same three questions, right? What programs or services do we deliver and at what level and at what cost? Once you determine what level of, let's just pick highways, what that level of maintenance is, from the staff side, we just need to calculate what the cost is, and we need to have a strategy to do it. There are, as was alluded to before, whether you talk vehicle registration fee, borrowing, or you prioritize that work over other projects. That's a question that, I hope that we as staff can bring information to the board to help you have that conversation in as fruitful a way as possible, because there are pros and cons. I said that at infrastructure. I can absolutely see the rationale for each avenue should you choose to maintain that level of funding. So I've heard you loud and clear relative to, I know we need to do a better job on financials. Timing of the budget needs to be better. We're going to strive to do that. Each and every year I try to tell you, try to do a better job than the year before. We still have work to go.
Any other comments on this issue? Any other comments? What are your wishes? Recommendation for, against, or no recommendation? What are your wishes? Supervisor Marshall?
I say no recommendation.
That would not require a motion. Is there any motion before us? If not, we have achieved your goal of no recommendation. That'll be advanced to the board for discussion for tomorrow. Are there any other amendments or comments from the board relative to the budget? I do not. Supervisor Lemmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just thinking out loud here, I don't know if this is appropriate, so stop me if it is, but what would be the possibility of us exploring a biennial budget instead of an annual budget? Could that be analyzed at some future meeting? I don't know if that's even statutorily allowed, so maybe it's not a good idea.
I believe that St. Croix County has one county does. The problem becomes one of federal and state funding cycles being out of sync with your budgeting process. And the problem is you're dealing with continuing resolution after continuing resolution on the federal level. The state has a biennial budget. You could tie into that, but there is still there would be a 6-month lag at some point in time. So we can look at it, but there are some consequences relative to your ability to forecast what your revenue from other sources would be.
It's Washington County is the county that I understand does a biennial budget. I have a very good relationship with the county exec from Washington County. I could certainly have him present, perhaps along with their board chair, on how they make that work.
I looked at Pat in the back and I said, biennial budgets aren't necessarily any easier than annual budgets.
You don't have a budget, does it go back to the old one, like the state does?
No. Chair Gibbs.
Well, I think the other thing is we know that some of those funding cycles from the state and various programs are calculated, even though there is a biennial budget, the calculation for highway funds are an annual calculation. So in some cases, we'd be projecting what those numbers are. And clearly, that's what a budget is a projection, but again, it's anticipated. But if we're wanting to get to more, accurate budget, if you will, as some people have indicated, I think that might be even more challenging when you're looking at a 2-year cycle.
Any other issues? If not, we will move on to review of the 2025 budget resolution. Sam, do you have, based upon, well, it's hard for us to because we haven't adopted the motions, we've made recommendations, but based upon the recommendations made to date, how does that impact us? We'll need to deal with the resolution as presented, and then, but I think it would be helpful to understand what the consequences of today was.
Yeah, absolutely. So the resolution will move it forward to county board for consideration tomorrow evening. As it sits, this is the way the board or the budget is currently presented. So once they get through the budget amendments tomorrow, should they choose to act upon it, we just have to change probably the operating levy, or the debt levy, based on how some of those are worded. But I will make sure that I am prepared to kind of help guide that along as far as when it's approved, what modifications should be made in that meantime.
Just want to pick up on one of the words you used. Should they approve? What is our deadline for adopting a budget?
Well, I have to put the apportionment in by Friday, so that is.
So should they is, they will.
Yes, they will.
To all municipal clerks by Friday afternoon, so, yeah.
Wednesday.
Yes.
The city's looking for that as soon as possible.
Yeah.
We don't want tax bills to go out late because we'll have a lot of angry people.
Sam.
So I'll have a chart ready to go, letting you know where to change it. And then just the verbiage again, because some of it will change things like be it further resolved, the total amount. It could change in the operating levy. So a lot of it will be on the fly, but if I could have some time between the budget amendments and the final resolution to make sure that I got that all figured out and am confident in it, I'd appreciate it.
Mike, again, do we need to take action tonight? It's the discussion. So tomorrow we'll have to do that adjustment based upon the action. So we've already authorized the budget for publication that incorporates that resolution. So any other discussion on that topic? All right, we are on to Chapter 4. Administrator Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a memo in your packet relative to a revision that I've made to Chapter 4, Section 5 of the employee policy. I won't go through it in detail. It applies to the department heads that report to independent boards, so Central Wisconsin Airport, Library Board, ADRC. Our old policy, well, first of all, it never was exercised by any independent board to move forward. And second of all, I don't think it's legal. So I changed it. It's certainly not operational. I can't take airport funds if the airport director, if your old policy allowed for the airport director or any of those independent boards to be essentially put with all the other appointed general fund department heads for purposes of allocation of wages and raises. The challenge, of course, is that, as you all know, not every dollar is created equal. Airport dollars are airport dollars. ADRC gets funds from multiple counties. And the library gets, once they're allocated funds, by statute, they have to maintain, they get the authority to maintain those funds. So it didn't work. Essentially, the revision I've made in speaking with Corp Counsel is essentially to be consistent with the underlying intergovernmental agreements and the law. So it's up to those boards. I added language encouraging them to follow the directives and philosophy relative to pay for performance of the county, but pretty innocuous agreement or innocuous change in my estimation. But happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions of the administrator relative to the memo and the policy relative to Chapter 4 in the handbook? If not, what are your wishes?
It's not, it's education.
Oh, it's education? I'm sorry. Yep, you're right. So we'll move on to update on tax delinquent property.
I'll take that one as well. Also hope to be brief. One, just to kind of an update from where we were. As was alluded to in your earlier comments, we have made a push. The HR Finance and Property Committee has provided specific direction to administration and to the treasurer's office to really try to address those delinquent parcels. As you all know, the counter book was kind of the document that we started to use as a kind of touchstone to see how we're doing, and I wanted to give you an update over the last month. We have seen, and I'll just go the last couple of years in terms of certificates, a drop in the number of 2024 delinquent parcels by 144. 2023 delinquent parcels, a drop of 27. 16 and 22, 18 and 21, 10 and 20, 4 and 19, and then 3 from 2014 through 2019, and 1 in 2013. So the long and short of it is people are paying, as one would hope and expect. What that equates to in terms of real estate liability, there was a reduction in owing real estate taxes of about $500,000. And a reduction in the outstanding special liability by about $9,000. So that's just kind of an update as to where we are. In terms of the specific direction provided by HR Finance to county administration relative to the plan to send out those past due notifications to all the parcel owners that are on that counter book list, we are ready to do that, and we just got word we should have the envelopes. So those were the last things we were waiting on, the envelopes with past due in red on the outside. We have a plan in place to send about 1,100 letters to that address 1,100 properties. Essentially everything other than what we referred to as the batch 2 delinquency in REM group. In speaking with Treasurer Beiersdorf, she wanted me to let you know that those are being sent out today and tomorrow, and all will be complete this week in terms of getting those out. Our timeline is largely similar for the past due notifications, so we didn't want to have people get 2 letters, one saying we're proceeding with in-rem tax foreclosure and a second saying we may be proceeding with that if you continue to not pay. So all of those letters should go out in the very near future. We also have, the treasurer wanted me to give a reminder that she is and her staff are consistently receiving calls on payments. Phase 2 will be available, those Phase 2 parcels, for mid-February to file that foreclosure notice, with court anticipated in mid-April unless individuals pay in full prior to that date. Relative to the letters that are going out, just general past due notifications, I can share that we've had a conversation around modifying the phone tree within the treasurer's office so that when individuals, I assume individuals are going to call with questions, that we will have information on that phone message so that if we are not immediately available to answer those calls, that they get the information they need. The letter itself provides both the web address for them to look at the amount outstanding. It also is in the letter itself, and it provides a QR code that would link them directly to the website where they can pay. We also have a plan in place to augment the treasurer's office with staffing in the event that we need additional individuals to return phone calls from landowners that have received those communications. So I think we're doing our best to carry out the will of the committee and really addressing that those delinquent parcels.
All right. Any questions for the administrator? Progress is being made. All right. Then under items for future discussion, we have a need for 2 joint meetings. One is with the Extension, Education, and Economic Development Committee relative to the future of the university. There is a work group that has been put together to discuss the future of the university. However, those are our buildings. County owns the buildings, and the Extension, Education, and Economic Development Committee has an interest in the programming and the future of it, and we have an interest in the the property itself, and there are some buildings that may be surplus, but I think it would benefit from a joint discussion and hearing what that work group that the UWSP WASA, also known as UWMC, are working on and in sort of setting the county's position or defining what the county's position and policy would be. We have the option of inviting them to our meeting. I know that they cannot, the chair cannot make the 19th, so we are meeting twice in December, on December 11th and 17th. They are meeting on December 5th. They meet at 3 o'clock on the 4th, or excuse me, the first Thursday. We also have, based on the discussion today, the need to sit down with the infrastructure committee, and we have, as Commissioner Griesbach gave us a presentation a while ago in open and closed session relative to the future of the highway facility. We need to continue those discussions as well as deal with the fund balance policy. And again, we can look at a future meeting. It could be as soon as the 9th or the 9th, is it the 19th? The 19th of November, or our meetings in December, or their meeting on on December 5th. Are you open to an additional meeting on the 5th with either of those standing committees when they meet, or we can invite them here? The chuckle is invite them here.
So it doesn't matter. I'm on both committees.
Feelings, Scott?
Before January is good for Lisa.
Either one or any of them, and see what works.
I was going to say, not the morning, but I could do the afternoon of the 5th.
They meet in the morning, though.
Infrastructure meets in the morning, but we might be able to discuss a change. Hypothetically, or we could look at a 1 o'clock meeting with infrastructure if they would be open for a change, and a 3 o'clock meeting with the EEDC, and do it all in one day and try to look at rolling the rest of our agenda for the following week and combining it. If people would be open to that.
Talk about the 5th.
Let me see if we can do that. That's a lot of moving parts, but we'll see. All right, we'll let you know how that works. Anything else to bring before us? We've got a significant backlog of issues that we'll be able to begin to work on now that the budget will be done tomorrow. Chair Gibbs?
Just one thing that I would like the committee to, or at least continue the work that the TIF task force and recommendations that the TIF task force had, and to take up the areas that are under the jurisdiction of the HR Finance Committee, and then also have the EDC Committee take up the issues of jurisdiction that on TIF.
Perhaps that could be subject to the discussion at our joint meeting. That would make sense. I will approach Supervisor Marash on that. Again, I was negligent when we started the budget here, and I'd like to thank the administrator, the finance department, and all the department heads for their role in developing the budget, and we'll have a chance to do that more formally tomorrow. But I think a good job was done by all within the limitations of still transitioning to that new system and getting all the quirks worked out. But thank you. Anything else? If not, item 10, what are your wishes? Moved by Chair Gibbs to adjourn, is seconded by Supervisor Poole. All those in favor of adjournment will signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. That motion carries. We are adjourned.